I know that Blackfish is really excited to have you as our guest artist in Fishbowl 2. The Fishbowls are kind of different, but at the same time, I think they offer the best exposure for artists because, it's the street, and it's a very active street. The Pearl, which is what this district region is called, I'm sure you know that by now, is really active when it comes to foot traffic. I mean, anywhere in the Pearl, you got people marching up and down pretty much well into the night. So it's a lot like I compare it to the East Village. You know, I spend a lot of time in living in New York City and all. And so,
okay.
So the Village is immediately what comes to mind every time I observe or step out the door, the Pearl. So tell me, what brought you west?
Well, a job opportunity, to be transparent, Eddie, because I was at a residency in Massachusetts for about a year. And then I wanted to kind of start applying myself to places that kind of had a long-term vibe of what I wanted as a creator, right? I wanted to sort of live in this space that was, a major city that had a large art environment, or at least the spirit of art. And then also want to be in a college town. Like I love kind of going, across the street to a coffee shop. That's just been my bread and butter growing up in my 20s. So when I applied for jobs, Portland came to mind. I am currently the lead faculty at PCC for new media. I'm starting up their curriculum for that. Yeah. So that opportunity really, felt its way through me because teaching is a huge part of my practice. And I felt working with a community school would sort of be a way to kind of, I don't know, I guess sort of in a humble way, sort of make education much more about something that is sincere than just sort of, institution, academia, which I have always been accustomed to from my background, if that makes sense.
But it makes a lot of sense. I too was a longtime educator, 40 years actually. And and going here in the Northwest, I've always admired Portland for its people accessibility. And typically, at the community college level, you're absolutely right on about that too. The students generally want to be there. I mean, they most pretty much have a short-term goal. They're trying to get a certain job, but they're locked in as to which direction they tend to want to go. And so they're getting those qualifiers so that they can get out there and better compete. And I for one, always find that environment a lot more stimulating than let's say the 4-year setting, which I've taught in, where it's like, well, Dad said he'll pay for the school, but I don't know what I'm going to do.
Oh man, don't get me started. I mean, that's like literally the residency I was at. I was at a residency where the tuition was really high, and there was a lot of rich kids, and there was a lot of that kind of atmosphere. Not for all my students, but there was it was some.
Yeah, they're just buying time.
Yeah.
And for us who are very, very serious creators, it bugs me because I don't have the time to waste.
It triggers me, especially I have to have job. Like, dude, my 20s, I had 3 jobs, and when I was in college, I had to work, study. Yeah, triggers me.
I hear it. Same deal. Well, back to your art. I've had the opportunity to really examine it closely. And I find it really intriguing. And when I look through your artist statement, there are some things in there that, if you don't, let's talk about that for a bit.
Yeah.
Your opening line on your artist statement, you say that film, video, I have to adjust here. I'm an old man, my glasses go funky. Film, video, genres, animation, and the networked globalization of images. Flush that out for me. What does that look like in your head, especially the networked globalization of images? That meaning of that. How is that playing for you?
Well, so let's just talk start from the ground, right? So coming from a painting background, right?
Mm-hmm.
We talk about appropriation where we're really inspired by different artists and we might take and put things into our work as creators. And I find that sort of been just a common language when it comes to just people in general, like with the rise of the internet and with the rise of having access to talk and see someone else across the globe, right? Now today it's like kind of more, of a thing that is just understood. But growing up, I grew up in the 90s and 2000s. So I was there when like internet was sort of like really becoming mainstream and like memes were becoming a thing. And then like, oh, wait, you were able to sort of like actually play video games from like another country and experience media that way and like come to terms of who you are that way and your identity. So imagery, even now I think about like with COVID and how, during, the George Floyd event, folks around the world were able to actually like look at that event and, in a very uncensored way. And that's become the language, like we're able to sort of like glean aspects of humanity through images being shared. So in the statement, that's kind of what I mean is that like, this sort of network being like how we're able to communicate. Network being through internet, network being through like kind of the web and going from coast to coast, country to country has been a way in which we're able to kind of just like have clear communication and evolve as humans and, be empathic. Like, I don't think there would have been as much of an uproar as it was if people were not all at the computer at the same time looking at the event of like injustice as we had gotten, thank God, during, that summer. That's just sort of what I mean by that. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, totally. So how do you think that that change, that globalization of images and all has supported the cause to include more people of color, more artists of color into the public view? That is the topic now. But I'm after hearing you explain what you just did, that thought just popped into my mind that, well, it should be helpful for organizations that have traditionally not looked at or considered artists of color's work as one that they would be that interested in or that they would think their market is interested in. But with this wider availability of images, and especially through pipelines like what we're using now through Zoom, you can see recorded videos. So what do you think? You think that has made your task as a professional artist and getting out there for the public to view, has it made it easier, or is it making it easier? What do you think?
Well, I feel so. The quick answer is it's yes, but it's more of how and why, and it's broader than just me because I do come from a privileged background of like being in art school, so I kind of know the language, right? I think the broader case is that like when we talk about like people of color, blacks, etc. We're also talking about like what access do they have due to sort of like financial issues when it comes to sort of accessibility due to like profiling, things of that nature. And I feel we can kind of go back to like, I think the common thing is like someone like Picasso being inspired by like African like art and then like taking that and sort of getting a lot of credit and sort of attention from that. And now I think with today, you couldn't really do that as much. Like, right? It's like if you took something from a culture and called it yours, that wouldn't fly. I just being blunt. I'm being in the most quickest way. Like that was then. Right. Yeah. So I think because of that, the sort of theft and sort of appropriation, culture appropriation without recognition is sort of been really addressed, or at least because of the fact that like, I think institutions that have typically, allowed this to happen have to now come to terms with like their market and has to come to terms with, like their audience. And, yes, they might be able to make a quick buck from like those within inside the institution. But if they're trying to expand their market, if they're trying to, get more in it, public image is really a big thing. Not saying never was, but like social media, like you can get, like, what I'm saying? Like that can really destroy a company. You can look at Twitter right now. Twitter is, on fire because of that. And they are even the social media platform that is about social media spreading can also be getting filleted if they don't get their stuff together when it comes to like everything. So going back to blacks, I think now that, we have the ability just with our phones, man, to like take a picture, to like doodle on it, and to share that. Like I was talking with my students about, rather than just like, making a big website, you got Instagram, man. You got like a lot of sort of like even smaller sub communities where you can have your audience. And it's no different than how it was back in the Renaissance, where artists were just commissioned by the church, which is a small audience of the elite, they get money and they get paid to do crap. And you can be like, there are folks that are African Americans that are on YouTube that are making money with their audience, So really, I think it's more the fact that like rather than seeing it in like this very narrow Eurocentric hierarchy of like what's important, it's way more lateral. And there's many communities that you can exist in and find your own version of success. And that is how I think Blacks and people of color, or any type of group that has sort of been disenfranchised, has been able to find power within sort of, I'm talking about with globalization, things like that.
Oh, there's no question about that. Today I was just perusing around, online, and that thought that you just raised right on point came to my mind. It's like, well, why do we need galleries? Or that question is becoming bigger and bigger. Why do we need the permission of traditional image houses to make our name and go forward? There's an artist. He's a rapper, and I'm just getting familiar with him. And for example, and he just launched a name and image likeness promotion company, college athletes, and the company is like going gangbusters because the athletes, given what they are, they're young, teenager, late teens, 20 somethings, who are, very much familiar with his art form, as a musician. And so it seemed like, God, he didn't, you didn't need to have, the big publishing houses or big promotional houses to make that connection. He's just killing it.
Yep.
Yeah. So that made me think, galleries today, the ones, that are there, they operate on three planes. You're obviously spot on about that. And it's all around what they perceive to be their base, their audience. But, tastemakers are tastemakers. You don't, the audience rarely tells a tastemaker what they want. The tastemaker puts it out there and typically tells the audience that you need this.
I like that word, tastemaker. I'm writing that down right now. I'm gonna appropriate it.
Because I'm of the generation of the radio medium and the television early marketing days, right?
Yeah.
And I remember this argument, artistically speaking, around music in particular, that, well, radio stations especially, well, we play it, but we don't think our audience would really like that.
Right.
But they make the audience. So if you tell them this is the happening thing, those kids are killing themselves to get it. So how does that work? I mean, figuring out how that plays out. It's an most interesting thing. Today, I'm finding more and more, my galleries, I'm pretty lucky. I've got about 5 and in and around the Northwest. And it's interesting. Initially, they thought they were going to get work that looked like Basquiat.
Oh man, the stereotype of like blacks, especially blacks over the age of 30, or like even just like the sort of like the neural of like, oh yeah, you're like kind of like, in this sort of very expressionistic way, and then you have to look this way. Yeah. And it gets taught a lot in institutions too, Eddie. Like really? Like where I was from, I knew a lot of like African Americans were like, because professors are like familiar with Basquiat, and they would like be like, oh, well, that's good because it's like, they're from direction of like, abstract expressionism, and then sort of like, again, like postmodernism, and going from there, they propagated that, and it kind of let the stereotype. I like Basquiat, but like that is a stereotype. It's like blacks have to be Basquiat, which is like,
It
you
is.
know.
It's an interesting thing. Interesting. It's kind of crazy, but you know, we soldier on. That's the most important thing, is that we're consistent and we're out there,
Yeah.
and eventually we get accepted for what we do. I'm also really intrigued by this statement you made, which is where you included the phrase illusion and delusional discussions that surround the complexities of race, sexuality, religion, and age, old and young. Let's open that up a little bit.
Yeah.
How do you reflect that? I went back, going back and looking at your graphic pieces, and I'm trying to. I'd like to know, how do you see any of those works that you are presenting now? Where is that representation in that work? Be a guide for me for a minute.
Sure. So first and foremost, I would say that statement talks to the Sunkeepers universe as a whole. Because for me, the way the drawings work, and the drawings serve as kind of like a vignette and a window into sort of how I think about my video making process, my film process. So when in the drawings themselves, the way in which it sort of like tackles that is more of like the representation of like the Afro hero, right? In that sense, that'll be more of the race sense. As far as for, the age sense and like characters and what it means to sort of live a legacy and passing down the torch, while thematically that is a little kind of implicated when it comes to the iconography of like some of the helmets that are representing Super Sentai stuff from Japan during the Power Rangers era, and like the idea of like the flame, and like there's one drawing I have in the show, which is Campfire of Dreams, and is of this like kid as like this sort of flaming ghost next to his mother as she's asleep pregnant with another child. And you have like these two like warriors kind of like protecting the mother while she's asleep. And that talks a little bit to the whole like the idea of like the legacy, the passing the torch, the sort of the flame, the spirit, which I talk to as the aging. That's what it means for me. But that's way more transparent in the video work. So there's no need to be like, David, where is this? And, I would say the drawings more of the race and gender. Drawings have that. The aging aspect, that's much more narrative, and thus I feel I am more comfortable expressing that within filmic format, because I can have time be a part of that, which I think is important for talking about the idea of age, because you want to see evolution. Not that drawing can't do it. Like I'm a huge fan of like comics or artists like Trendilla Hancock or Goya. So I know narrative can exist that way, but I just think that's more of a video film job. You know what I mean?
I do, and that's a great opening up of that for me. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And speaking of, you just made a couple references to artists who you admire and seem to influence your work. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Artists such as Matthew Barney, Trenton Dell Hancock, Henry Drager, who I'm not familiar with, Henry Drager, but your work tends to, and correct me right or wrong, your work tends to have a birthplace in anime.
Yeah, actually, yeah. So, well, a lot of like Japanese visual culture in general, like I mean, Godzilla was something I watched my uncle a lot when I was growing up, and I mentioned like Power Rangers, which live action stuff, but and the most part, that even video games, it has a birthplace within that.
And so, how do you see yourself avoiding that tar pit once again of appropriation, and as opposed to an inspired different perspective?
Totally. For me, that's where the Afrofuture lens ties its way into the work. You see, for me, and I don't know if you're familiar with like writers like Octavia Butler, or Sun Ra, folks like that. But essentially, when it comes down to it, it's personal narrative over sort of where it's from, and where it's from always finds itself in naturally because that's how I was raised. So for example, as a child, I was exposed to all this. So it's part of my vocabulary. So I'm not just sort of like finding a mask and just copying its texture and putting it on a figure. You know,
Oh no, that's quite apparent. That's
yeah, right. Well, I'm giving an example, right?
Yeah.
Instead, you know, I am the person in costume, but then the stories are much more about experiences that are like, you know, personal to me and are reflective of that. And it's more of like things such as like maybe the timing in the film, or like when it comes to the drawings, you know, the line and precision work from something like Kentaro Miura, who did like this manga called Berserk, who he was inspired by Goya. Just to be transparent with that too, right? Or even kind of like the iconography aspects, like, oh, there, you know, he's wearing a helmet from this, or maybe, you know, the idea of like, oh, well, fantasy wise, just like with something like Octavia Butler's science fiction, you can see references to like a neuromancer in their regards, or for me, you know, reference something like a Studio Ghibli film with like, you know, the idea of spirits and the idea of like, you know, nature and sort of man, and having that back and forth between like machine, nature, etc., that you would find something, you know, accustomed to like Princess Mononoke, right? Which is a like nice Ghibli film. Highly recommend if you haven't seen it, check it out.
Okay.
Yeah. He's like kind of the Hayao Miyazaki is sort of like the Walt Disney for Japanese animation, but he's actually won quite a bit of awards here in the States too.
Yeah, I certainly will do that because I'm a fan of anime. For its, you know, the storyline in particular, and
its storyline is so good, and it's like not censored. And you know what it is? I think here's to answer your question too. With anime, it's not that I was like super like fanboying over like just the aesthetics. It's the type of stories I was exposed to as a kid, and being Black. You know, you're exposed to tragedy at a young age.
Oh, yes, exactly.
So I feel when I was watching a lot of Western stuff, I felt alienated because I wasn't seeing stories that represented me or represented my experience. But then, like, for example, I would see something like Spider-Man. He gets bitten by a spider and gets powers. It's like, that's not how it works, right? But I'll watch an anime and I'm like, wow, this person experienced racism and was like the lowest class, you know, warrior, and had to train his way up to become strong. Okay. As a kid, I can kind of, you know, put myself in there, right?
Yeah. Imagine how busy the hospitals were when Spider-Man broke in the US with kids who run around grabbing spiders.
Oh man, my mommy.
I know. I had a artist I had an artist, senior artist who I admired greatly, tell me one day, he says, you know, Ed, he says, America has a marketed sense of reality. You know, we were in this conversation about, well, what does it take to influence the art market in America? He says, you know, we have a marketed sense of reality. So start a damn marketing campaign and you're in there. So I thought, well, I have to think about that one a minute.
I can see that. Yeah, no, totally. And I mean, it even hits our kids too. So there you go.
And you know, what you had just said, I heard that articulated today as well with this musician artist who I guess just got. I know I'm kind of slow in the uptake of pop culture. I spend way too much time in my studio. That's what my children tell me, etc. But
you're fine, man.
Wiz, that's his name, Wiz, and it's like I'm listening to his lyrics today, and that whole structure of explaining these, you know, the psychology of the whole Black experience, was incredibly powerful, and it's a common theme right now for artists, especially artists of color. I've noticed, especially male artists of color. When you look at people like Robert Taylor, or even to a degree, well, more than a degree, but not as direct as Taylor, but Carrie James Marshall.
Yep.
You know, really different than the Jacob Lawrence era. Let me tell you, very different. They put it directly out there. So what do you find typically to be the expectation of your work when you present that? How has that reaction door swung for you?
It depends on the piece. That's how, I mean, if I were to be, completely honest, like each piece has a different, what story am I telling? And then how explicit is that story? So, for example, the drawings in the show is probably not the most, it is not the most explicit I've been when it comes to storytelling. I did a piece called Grandchildren of the Ash back in 2018. It was a film piece, and it was in response to I don't know if you're familiar with like the Emma Tilt incident that happened with Dana Schutz's painting.
Oh yeah. Oh, I actually was there. I particularly got myself on an airplane, flew to New York, went into the Whitney, and located the painting, and I took position next to it to listen to the public reactions. And it was interesting.
It was interesting. So I had my position on it. And and while I think the painting was not the best made, I do understand the intention of trying to empathize. Like, I was like, okay. I'm like, so
she's an ally.
It was an ally. Yeah. I don't like, for example, it's almost like maybe, and I was telling one of my students because they were very upset with the painting and like was furious. That's cool. But like, I come from like an educator background. So like, I'm used to like kids and students meaning well and doing the opposite because they just don't. So I come in with like all right, this is bad. Yes. But your intentions, I know how to separate it. So I was very upset with like folks that I was speaking to that like wanted to just burn the painting and burn the artist. I was like, whoa.
Yes.
Whoa.
Yes.
Yeah, that to me kind of triggered me. So I made a piece where the character Riakman, I actually created an Emma Tilt mask and I wore it, and I wanted to sort of heroicize the notion of like what that figure stood for, at least when it came to like, oppression and whatnot, within the context of the narrative in the film. Right. So that piece, for example, had a lot of different eyes. And what was interesting is that there was the critic, Hannah Black, who was kind of one of the folks pushing that. Yeah. She actually came to my school during that exact week. I had the pleasure of talking with them, and I had some words with them about that. And then a year later, when I made the piece, she was actually at the screening, and I was like, "Oh man!" It was like probably the. It was like so that right there would be an example of kind of like maybe with expectations where like I think depending on like what it is I'm trying to like express and why I'm trying to express it, whereas how I said it. With the drawings, it's much more about kind of like making sure that there's a vignette in a way in which people can understand the thematics of the world I am building. And I think that's okay as an African American artist, where you don't always have to sort of like be talking about race as explicitly, but race is part of the discussion. So every once in a while, I am going to like have to get my hammer and, whack something. Right. Which I did, and then also my piece so this film that I'm doing right now, Eden Sphere, is actually in response to is another me with a hammer. And I recently had the pleasure of learning about my family history, going all the way back before like when we were like on the ships coming from Africa type of history.
Oh, lucky you. I have my family. We have no trace before 1935.
Whoa. Oh yeah. No, I have a book that goes over it. So I read this book, and just, not to get too, personal, but there was a moment in there where I was like in the skin of my great times 6-7 grandmother, and I was reading about how she was raped. And while I never knew this person, for like 30 seconds I felt malice equal to if I heard about my own mother. And I don't know, that was some sort of like cellular, like my body recognized like, dude, that's your mom. So my piece I'm doing now is like kind of about slavery and it follows this sort of young woman who is pregnant with her child, who is in the drawing, but it's going to follow her. So that's kind of like, I see the drawings more like vignette, whereas the film, I can be more like whack, whack, whack.
Well, yes. And that feeds nicely into my next question. You've mentioned your filmmaking quite a bit in your artist statement and in our interview time here as well. The choice you made to include in this exhibit, albeit a small one, but in this exhibit to include your actual drawings as opposed to film stills.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you take me through that?
Sure.
Why the choice?
Sure. So before anything, I'm a draftsman, man. I got my degree in painting, but drawing was where I started. My father was an illustrator, and we was always to sort of draw with that. So drawing is kind of my core. So there's that part. In my last show I was in, well, not the last, the one before that, back in 2020, it was at the Kloss Gallery. I got yelled at because I had this collector box which had like my film, and inside it was a bunch of drawings in it. So I was going to have the drawings, just come with the film for like the limited editions I was making. And the gallery was like, dude, you can sell these. Like, what are you doing? And on top of that, my friends always got on my case about not taking my drawings seriously, because I always saw them as like, I love drawing, but then they became like more storyboards. Like I would draw, and then it's like, what if this was a movie? And then I would just, go from there process wise. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to at least one time, see what it would be like, and what would be the response that, like, in a vulnerable way, having my drawings be out there without support of the video and the stills. I wanted them to sort of like be their own thing. And, and so far I've kind of been happy to see my kids, out there kind of doing their own thing differently. It's like a different dialogue than I'm actually used to. Right.
Well, that's the permission.
Yeah.
That's the permission piece in my head that's artists today, the younger kids in particular, feel like they've been given permission to not only speak their mind, but work through their issues as well, and feel really comfortable with that. I know as that kind of art making started to really take hold and rise, that I personally felt kind of uncomfortable, because I figured, that's when artists would reveal their psychology, their psychosis so directly. It's like, man, I don't know. I think that's a bit more information than I care to take in at the time. But, art as a process for doing that, not unusual, not at all. It's just that we've never seen collectively, the grand we've never seen it done to such a degree. Typically, it's images that calm us down and not make us think too deeply, and that's what I've been pushing away from all of my artistic life, actually, because I guess I kind of bugged by that, the Norman Rockwell thing,
totally.
The sand and seagull thing. It's like, come on,
I see what you're saying, Eddie. That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah.
I grew up with I gravitated towards and discovered at a young age artists like Charles White, who's showing how art is used to raise consciousness. And that's been the theme of my pursuit all along. So it's kind of interesting to see it taken even further by the younger generation of artists. So what do you think about that? Let me hear your thoughts on that.
Well, that talks to this idea of passing down the torch, man, just to be blunt. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's an important thing. And before I talk about it in a race sense, because there's also part of that is important here, just in a general, like, creative sense of humanity, like, I think as you get older, you just realize the responsibilities you have and the power you actually have. True. You become, when you are able to have power and a voice, you realize that not everybody has that, and not everybody has the voice, and you become theirs. You become like a way for them to channel what their experience was. And that doesn't necessarily get rid of yours. That's where I think that confusion happens when you're younger, is that you think you have to speak for them through their words and not through your own, but it's actually the opposite. It's by you being who you are and speaking through your own words, you inspire them to then be who they are. You lead, you become their pathfinder. So bringing it to more of a race side of things, right? Part of Black history is that, like, things did not end within a generation, right? Racism, slavery, all these things, they had to fail. They had to die and then pass the torch down to the next generation. And to me, I think failure is such a thing that like I just fucking seek every day. Like I like getting success is great. It's like a nice moment to pause and breathe, go, good, I have a roof over my head, right? But you don't learn. You don't learn that much from success. You learn from failure. Failure guides you to what you need to do and why you need to do it. And it makes you better. And so when it comes down to what you're talking about of like, oh, well, you know, my generation, I didn't do this. I'm like, you were doing what was necessary for your generation, what was necessary for that time. And it was up to then someone else to pass that torch and continue that fire.
Yeah, spot on.
Right.
Yeah,
and that's how I look at it.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for that. That's spot on. Well, you know, in my studio, I have a sign in which I do look at before I begin a work, or when I'm contemplating something I'm already in the process of. And it simply says, do not be afraid to begin again. And that's my way of, of recognizing that failure is part of the process. It's not a indictment on my ability as an artist or vision. It's just that getting the language right might not have hit it at that time, but that doesn't mean it's the idea still isn't in there. And that's very useful. Absolutely. Well, that gets down to the last statement of yours that I found interesting as well. I found your whole artist statement, by the way, so amazing response. I mean, I probably spent about a good 2 weeks, getting ready for this interview.
Oh God! Oh man! I feel like, oh man, I should have wore a suit. Oh goodness!
Because your artist statement was so compelling, and I had so many questions to ask. But
well, let's get it. Well, first, you don't need to probably get a beer or something. The makeup for me walking by you, because again, okay. I was just in rush mode. Once we're done with the formal interview, let's just chat. Let's meet. Let's hang out.
You have a deal on that one, honestly.
All right.
Okay, so so in the end, you state that what is my purpose of existing in a world that is governed by rules built upon an unclear history? Rules in particular, unclear history specifically. What's your reference there?
Well, I mean, just to go back, man, like I'm 30 and I'm just learning about my family history, right? That's only one perspective. And as much as I love my uncle for who sort of documented and wrote that, obviously he had to make a narrative for it to flow. And thus the perspective is not like I was there, right? I mean, the facts are there, but there's still things of context I don't know about. And what about everybody else's history? And, growing up as all of us do, we don't know what our history is. We don't really know our roots. We're too busy in the short term trying to figure out like, hey, how do I do this? How am I able to function? Right? You're so busy in the functioning. And for me, when I think about my body of work and sort of like my investigation as an artist, it's in context of acknowledging that wherever my roots truly are, it's always going to be this sort of lack of clarity. And as I'm uncovering that and excavating it, that process is going to allow me to kind of like make work, right? And I think either whether it's being an artist or not, this unclear history is something we all have. I mean, even, now you would think with social media and like technology, our history would be more clear, but actually might be the opposite. There's ways in which narrative and stories can sort of obfuscate truth and facts, right?
Very true. Absolutely correct.
I mean, putting it on the race side of things, like, there are parts in the States, my dad was telling me about, like Texas, where like they're trying to like get rid of Black history in school, man. Like, yo, what? I was going to mention this. Like, so this whole woke movement thing, really, that's just code for, we need to tell a history we're comfortable, not we, but this is the powers that be saying, we need to be telling our kids history that we're comfortable with them hearing. And I can just imagine what the motivation behind thinking like that had come from. Child comes home from school, sitting at the dinner table and says, "So, Daddy, are you a racist?" Oh, for me, it'd be more of like, hey, so we're coming home for Thanksgiving. Actually, Mom, I don't want to celebrate Thanksgiving.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't like the idea of killing the Native Americans. You mean Indians? No, Native
Native
Americans.
Americans. Yeah, 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 exactly.
Like I imagine that talking is like, oh. So I mean, but that's what I mean by unclear history. And here's what's scary is that like even going back to like, let's say when you were younger, and even you right now, I bet you there is stuff about who you are and your history that you still don't know about. And we're gonna die as humans, not knowing our full history. And it's contending with that, having to make sure that you still have an identity, because your identity is formed by your memory of how you were raised, the relationships you made, and what you remember about them. That informs who you are. So history is about memory, and those two things are so linked together that that's the struggle, right? When someone loses their memory, they're losing their connections, their history of why they exist. And for me, the work and trying to contend with that is sort of like, I think just the normal, like humanity's struggle to sort of like claim themselves. And that's what I mean by that. Hopefully that makes sense.
Well, thank you, David. Now, before I let you go, what one thing would you want to say to the viewing audience regarding your show and in Fishbowl 2 with Blackfish that you think is really, really important for them to take in when taking in your work?
Well, I think for me, I would tell the audience first, thank you for seeing it. It means a lot. You're seeing my first time ever showing my drawings in the public. And I appreciate you sharing this space with me. I would just love any type of thoughts, feedback, or just sort of words that what you felt. So my Instagram handle should be with the gallery. Reach out to me. I try to, not have too much of a barrier between my audience and myself. And other than that, as far as for the work itself, just take as much time to look at sort of the marks and the lines and the way in which my hand try to get across my ideas. For me, when I'm doing drawing, I get told I get anal when it comes to detail. But I don't know. I look at each mark as its own entity, and trying to like spend time and cultivating them to like an image at the end is sort of a byproduct of that. And hopefully I would just be curious on your journey of how you, the audience, experience that read and that sort of like engagement with looking at the work. That's kind of all I would say to them.
Wonderful. That's fantastic. Thank you very much, David. Really, really appreciate you taking the time. And we'll talk soon, hopefully.
Yes.
So speaking on some more, I do have one more. So where will we see more David Torres? What do we do? How do we?
What's going to happen? Oh, well, basically, so this is my first show in Portland. I've only been here for a few, so yay. And my goal is that coming up in 2023, I'll be releasing a trailer for my film project, Eden Sphere. And there's going to be probably a lot of push with that. So hopefully those that are kind of like following and looking at the show can stay in touch with, my handle, and you'll get information from there. On the website, there's like sunkeepers.art, which kind of goes over the whole mythos and history of like kind of the work and the world of Sunkeepers and like all the environments. There's like a link, just click that and you'll be part of a mailing list where you'll be notified of when the film's coming out, where it'll be shown, etc. And knowing how Portland is, there'll probably be posters everywhere, so people will know.
Oh yeah. They're really, really big at here in Portland anyway. Very, very big at public things, art, home produced things. Big supporters, huge supporters. Ooh, I think I just turned myself off. Huge supporters, that sort of thing. So we're looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it. So and I know our viewing audience. The gallery has gotten a lot of really good feedback. Good feedback on the work that's there in the Fishbowl, and to the point to where I think that people are really starting to tune in to what's being done with those spaces and at all. So again, thank you. Thank you for being our guest artist and taking the time with me today. And like I said, I'll be in touch. We'll do this off screen.
Yes, yes.
It'll
Let's
be a lot of fun.
after the holidays, let's
After
get
the
some coffee.
holidays. Yeah, after the holidays for certain. All right, David, you take care of yourself, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Eddie. All right, guys,
Okay,
take care.
bye.
Ciao, adios.